Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to the channel RPG with DBJ. Of course, I am your host, DBJ, and we are here to talk all week long for an hour, long form content um, about a particular subject. And of course, we subdivide that subject down. And this week, we're talking about the dungeon crawl. Yeah, the classic dungeon crawl. And if you've noticed the thumbnail or the thing, is in tabletop RPGs, is the dungeon crawl dead? Do we save it? Do we skip it, or do we slay it? Do we save the dungeon crawl? Is it something that is not just something from our legacy, but an actual tool in our toolbox? And despite recontextualizing it, we really do need it in the gaming community. Should we skip it? Meaning that, yeah, we could keep it around, but it might collect some dust down at the bottom of the toolbox. Um, or should we slay it? Like, is it something that it had its time? It is something maybe that people could engage in other venues, video games, board games, or hyper specific games. But basically, a couple years in tabletop RPGs, should we just forget it? Basically slay it, like never bring it back. Yeah. Now, the today is Discord Tuesday, and for those who don't know, Discord Tuesday, we me as the benevolent dictator has defaulted to talking about gaming mechanics, and so I thought I'd bring up some context for dungeon delving, classic dungeon crawling, and some of the mechanics involved in it, and a little bit of an armchair history lesson, I suppose, and where some of our classic gaming elements came from, and then consider if we should keep them around or not. And like I said, I'm not going to die on the hill of whether we should or shouldn't have a dungeon crawl, but I thought it would be kind of cool to take a look at something that's been around forever. And frankly, I think it has been incorporated into the majority of our tabletop RPG experiences, but this may also be a reason why, without having not thought about it too deeply, why sometimes we can come to the have different expectations for our tabletop games. Okay, so some of the mechanics involved in dungeon crawling. First, I'll say the profession of dungeon crawling. Okay, so let me give you an example. In the For when I started from the purple box, this was I don't believe I've ever owned the red box, but I do remember getting for Christmas the purple box, and there were there was this idea of having the classic four professions to go down into the dungeon because many of their attributes were needed to survive a dungeon. The classic four are the fighter, the thief. I know it's called a rogue now, but at the time it was called a thief. The fighter, the thief, the wizard, the cleric, right? And the fighter, you needed the fighter because you had lots of monsters. You needed a warrior class, someone that could take the punishment. Today it might be the meat shield, the brick. You need that person who can just like bam, take a lot of damage, stand up front, fight the monsters and hold them off and whatnot. And then you needed the thief. It was called the thief at the time, but there is the rogue, and the rogue's job was to disarm traps, to find secret doors, to listen at doors for what might be beyond the next room. That was a real thing. There was a real skill about listening at doors, finding concealed, both secret and or concealed locations. At a time in the gaming, at this time in gaming, there weren't any skills specific. I'm sorry, there weren't any skills that were generally available to all character classes. So the idea was that you had to describe your actions, and the game master would would give you success or failure based on your actions. Meaning, um, that's where the concept of the 10-foot pole came about. And for those of us that are old enough to remember, us grognards, it wasn't just a 10-foot pole. Oh, sure, you needed a 10-foot pole, which never understood why there was a big difference between a 10-foot pole and a staff. But anyway, you needed the 10-foot pole to prod ahead. But those of us that were smart enough, we'd carry chickens, ball bearings, sand, powder. I mean, caltrops. Like there was a ton string. There was a ton of things that we would carry down into a dungeon with us. I want to carry a magnet. I want to carry a fish hook. Like there was all these little bits and baubles we carry with us, and I can hear some of you thinking like, well, like as a fighter, like why would I need, I don't know, a pouch of sand or um, ball bearings or all these things and a chicken, And believe you me, the way some of these dungeons were designed, Tomb of Horrors being the ultimate middle finger, the ultimate fu to the players. You needed those things to progress into the game because for the most part, a lot of things were save or die, right? And even if it wasn't literally a save or die, which there were things where, Mr. Saving Throw, you were dead, some things did so much damage or cause so much loss to your character that they might as well just be a cliff jumper, right? So, yeah, you would need we would take sand and powder and blow it into cracks and to find like magic items. Sometimes you would have to find like a grate underneath a wardrobe that was a drain in the room for fluid, and then you couldn't move the grate. Yeah, Dead Man's like, or the Grimtooth's traps books. Yeah, oh hell yeah, the cantilevered hallways and um, rooms that would lock behind you, and the walls or the ceiling would close in on you, or you'd go into a chamber and the floor would fall away and you'd fall there. It was just so many. There were a ton of traps, and in order to get past the traps, it wasn't a matter of, oh, I'm going to make a skill check, disarm trap, right? At the time, it was you. If you didn't find the one loose stone in the floor, lift up that stone and flip the switch that would turn the trap off, then the trap, you just never figured it out. You had to tell your game master, okay, well, I'm going to feel on the floor, and the game master would say, oh, well, one of the stones seems to be loose. Great, I'm going to lift up the stone, and you had this conversational thing back and forth, and it could get a little adversarial, especially if depending on how specified the GM was, right, or the game master, dungeon master was. Like if someone said, well, I'm going to investigate the floor, and the game master goes, well, you didn't tell me you were specifically looking at the stones and at the entrance, which, yeah. Thank you, Dead Man. Oh, it's still on sale on Amazon. Grimtooth's Traps. Yeah. There's some of them are pretty bizarre. Like I don't know. It's some of the traps are a little bit too involved to I mean, of course they're fun and over the top, but yeah. Um, but that's where the trap and the gotcha came from, basically. So okay, so you have your fighter, pretty typical. You have your rogue or your thief to get past the traps and sneak around, to sneak further into the dungeon as well. You needed to have your rogue do that. There's the cover. Yep. 101 traps for use with any role-playing system. Yep. Grimtooth Traps is a series of system-neutral gaming supplements providing the busy game master with an assortment of pre-designed, if not pre-stated, traps. Right. And the idea is, of course, that the Grimtooth Traps would give you an idea of how they worked, the mechanisms involved, because players might, I don't know, take a spike and wedge it into a gear, or again, like I was saying, like you have ball bearings and it would roll them across the floor. Would it activate the trap. And then, of course, you had the anti-trap traps, like, oh, this trap won't activate until the weight of a human being, a player character stands on it. So even if they used a 10-foot pole or ball bearings, it wouldn't activate. Yep. And then, to go further than that, of course, you needed the wizard. And of course, the wizard was there um, to detect magic, which was a bigger deal in back in the day. I mean, every character class didn't have unique special abilities. It was far more about gathering treasure and make the treasure would enhance your abilities rather than leveling up to gain special abilities. Now, especially in fifth edition and quite a bit in Pathfinder, like, characters are, friggin' glowing nuclear arcane energy balls of energy because of all the ingrained magical effects that they have just from their character class. And I'm not even talking about spell abilities. So Tesla's like, as far as Grimtooth's traps was concerned, the only good trap was a fatal trap. Yeah. And like, again, a lot of that was gotchas. I don't know. I think that's a legacy from dungeon delving that even you guys even heard me talk about, that like I'm not really a big fan of. I mean, I love the creativity of the creating the traps, but they're usually one-sided, right? Like either the player character falls into the trap and the game master or dungeon master gets to sit back and laugh about it and go, "Ha, I gotcha," or they avoid the trap. Players get to laugh about it, and the DM gets to fold his arms and pout, right? Like it. There doesn't seem to be this combined like enthusiasm for traps. It's usually on one side of the DM screen or the other. And then, of course, with the wizard, detecting magic, being able to read magic was quite important at the time. And dispelling magic was a big thing, as well as, of course, needing to have spells to counteract a lot of the bad guys, right? If there were elevations, or they were not trapped, but the enemy is behind something that the other player characters couldn't get to. Of course, you have your magic, and of course, the magic would allow you to dungeon delve. Tensor's floating disc comes to mind. This is long before cantrips came about, that the wizard had to hold on to their spells to get through the dungeon, because much like a classic older video game, you needed to have a thing to get past a thing, right? It was plot coupon, as Tesla has brought up before. Plot coupons. You need the special thing to get past the thing. You need the key to open a door. You needed the ladder to climb up to the next level. You needed the plug to stop the water from flooding the room. Like, it was a lot of that stuff, and magic filled that part of it. And then, of course, we have the cleric. And while clerical healing, this was at a time when the only person that could heal was through the cleric. And we forget that turning the undead was a huge thing at the time, whereas a lot of undead creatures could only be harmed by magic weapons, and a lot of undead creatures had a lot of immunities and resistances, and clerics were there to, especially dungeons filled with a lot of random undead things. The cleric could turn undead, and basically the cleric, as it is now, the cleric was very much there to buff the other player characters and save them, especially with a ton of, back before we had conditions, there were things like curses were a big deal. Having your alignment changed, being infested and poisoned was a big deal as well, including having your attributes reduced, so you need a cleric at the time. So leaving that behind, there was a profession of dungeon delving, and you really needed the classic 4 to go with you into the dungeon. But there was a reason why you needed a classic 4 as well, is because you were going into the dungeon to get things. So experience points were tied to gold values. How much gold you brought back with you was very important. Magic item collection was very important. Like I said, a lot of the character classes didn't have l- nearly the amount of supernatural abilities that character classes have today. In our classic gaming back then, it was all magic item and loot that you gathered. So characters would have a ring and an amulet and um, boots and a cloak and maybe some armor and some random potions and a couple of bits and baubles. I always love the bits and baubles, like figurines of wondrous power, or a um, I don't know, a ever smoking bottle, or a rope, a magical rope of climbing, and things. There were all these little weird. I mean, there was, and a lot of the magic items were character specific, right? Like there were a ton of robes, various robes for wizards. There were plenty of um, religious styled items for your clerical character. Um, a crap ton of armor and weapons that also had other abilities for your fighter types. And then of course for your rogue, you had plenty of boots and gloves that did things. So yeah, it was all about collecting the treasure. And then of course you had to leave the dungeon with tens of thousands of gold pieces. And the reason for that was because there was a this idea that around at name level, back at name back in the day, there was something called name level. So each level of every character class had a name for it. And when you reached around ninth level, it was different for each character class, you would become a fighter or a thief. Right before that, you might have been a cut purse or a sneak or a shadow. But when you got to ninth level, you were actually a thief, and you could create your own thieves guild. Or if you were a fighter, you would establish a castle. And so a lot of the money, if you were a cleric, you would begin your own, you build your own church or religious structure. And so a lot of that had to deal with, you spent a lot of your gold using it to basically keep your lifestyle up and retire basically away from gaming, as well as spending a ton of gold to go to like sages to learn about rumors in the world and things like that. So you had a reason to spend tens of thousands of gold. It was basically a gold tax to continue gaming. So now that I explained a little bit of that for the background, um, now that we have like fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, the second edition of Pathfinder, a crap ton of OSR games out there, Swords and Wizardry, and a lots of name and name games. Whether it's like Trolls and Tunnels, or I don't know, Mutants and Mayhem, or I don't know, all those kind of things. Now that we have a lot of those games, um, some of the needed professions, I think, have kind of gone away. And it's weird because we still have the legacy of it, a legacy of some things in dungeon delving, but we don't have the results of the same things in dungeon delving. I'll explain in a minute. Rickard says, did you need to spend gold? All you really need for dungeon crawling is a 10-foot pole and a lot, and I mean a lot of rope. um, well, you didn't. You spent. Remember, you had to spend. Not had to, because of the save or die. You spent a lot of money on henchmen and hirelings to go down into the dungeon. There was finding rumors, so you had to spend money for sages, and like right now, the channel Questing Beast on YouTube is, I think he's got the third episode up already, and I believe each episode is about 2 hours long. And he's reading the entire original Dungeon Master's Guide from start to finish. And it is, to one extent, it's a little bit of a snooze fest, but on the other hand, you're just like, wait, what? I mean, there's whole charts on spending money on hiring spies and assassins and taking care of your castle or your guild, and I mean there was a lot of it. So while some of the gold was spent for dungeon delving, you know, you're right. Did you have to spend a lot of money for a 10-foot pole and some ball bearings and some thread and a fish hook or something? No, but it was spent when you got back to town. And of course, there was the idea of having weapons forged and spell crafting, and wizards spent a ton of money writing down their spells in their spell book, because this was at a time when wizards didn't just automatically add spells because of their spell slots. You had to discover spell books and steal them and find them out in the dungeon. And who knows if you were going to find a fireball? This is how the gaming was. You didn't even, as a matter of fact, it wasn't even really a thing that you would know what spells were available at any particular level. You found a spell book in the dungeon, and you discovered, like, darkness spell. What is a darkness spell? And that was the it was the wonderment of it. It was things being revealed to you that you didn't know was available to you. Now everybody knows everything. Yeah. Yeah, I listened to part 3. I wasn't sure how far he got it. Yeah, reading the whole A&D Dungeon Master's Guide. Uh, yeah, Deadman put the link in the Discord. Yeah. Now Rickard says dungeon crawling one 1 millimeter at a time is not. It's not about getting to the bottom as fast as possible. It's about getting there. 1 meter per day with lots and lots of poking ahead of you with that 10-foot pole. Yeah, and much like watching a movie from 20 years ago, it's like pacing was a lot different for old dungeon crawls than it is today, right? Like now, making a comparison, like for video games, like now there are people who go on speed runs through video games, like how fast can I get to the end? There are it's pacing and the development of television and movies. We have quick cuts, and how can the movie's 2 hours and 15 minutes long? That's too long. But back in the day, dungeon delving took a long time. Modules would come out, and you could play a module for, let's see, one session, 4-hour session per. You could probably, one module covered 20 hours, 30 hours of time. And sometimes it even got to the point where, like, I always pick with the locked door philosophy, where you would go into a dungeon and the PCs were like, "Oh, we finished it." And the game master's like, "No, you didn't. You didn't find the secret door to get to the rest of the dungeon." And the PCs are like rolling their eyes like, "Oh my God. All right, we've got to go back into the dungeon and stuff." Whoa, dude. Okay, Bruce Lombardo puts in a $10 super chat. Okay, so Bruce Lombardo says, once again, I get the pleasure of listening to your love to your love at work. You do a great job of illustrating the stark differences of our hobby between the game origins and the 15-minute adventuring day. Why, why, thank you very much. Damn, the way you said that, I almost feel like I paid you to do that, right? So yes, listen, dude, I'm old enough to remember those days, and just as I love the game now, I loved it back then. And like you're talking about the 15-minute adventuring day, God, there was no such thing as a short rest, long rest. Because you were down in a dungeon, and there wasn't any place for you to rest. Like, you almost had to carve out a space in the dungeon, lock a door, and set somebody up at the entrances and hope you could rest. And maybe, just maybe, you might gain some hit points back from those rests. There was no such thing. Oh, 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 thank you. Oh, you saying live work. I thought you were at work. Yeah, Bruce is like, live work. iPhone decided to tell me it's love work. Well, some of us love our work. I love doing this, so I don't really consider it work. This is my this is my morning coffee, as it were. So, dude, I really appreciate that, man. Thank you so much for it's a compliment. I really appreciate it, and I hope I'm doing a good job. I don't know. I feel like I get on the air and stumble the entire time. um, Rickard pointed out in Twitch, locked door actually unlocked but opens the wrong way. Now that would be hilarious for a dungeon master to go, yeah, you never opened up the door. Like I missed my Ben bars lift gates. And like, well, did you bother pulling the door towards you instead of pushing it open? Like, don't. But yeah, there were some things like bending bars lift gates was a an attribute you needed to have because there were places in the dungeon where you needed to bend bars or lift gates, right? Oh man, Bruce Lombardo says you set your rear guard fighter to watch the door and hope your magician wouldn't be disturbed while he rested for 4 hours and 30 minutes. Oh my goodness, yeah. Oh, I mean, heck, you had to keep track of. You didn't have to, but there was keeping track of rations. Tesla's like, it's a pull door. Yeah, it's a pull, not a push. Oh no. But yeah, there was classic dungeon delving. I mean, we had remember the old wandering monsters. That was a real thing. You had to uh, sometimes measured in days, other times measured in hours. You went down in the dungeon, and there was a reason why the game master was rolling dice behind the screen because if you spent too much time in a certain area of the dungeon or in certain rooms, or hell, just wandering down in the dungeon itself, random creatures would come across you and disturb your rest. And while you were sitting there poking and prodding around certain rooms and things, and it was it was a built-in way to get rid of analysis paralysis. And I know you guys have seen this. I've done it plenty of times by accident, where you give the player characters an adventure hook, right? You give it you boom, you pop it down in front of them, and you go, "Here's the adventure hook," and they go, "Great." They look at the adventure hook and they spend 5 hours wondering if they should grab onto that hook, and you're just sitting rolling your eyes like, make a decision. you know. And wandering monsters was a way for players to like, for the dungeon master, it was a tool to say, keep moving, you better keep moving, you better find us a better, safer place to go. That was a real thing. And I wonder if now that the dungeon crawl has kind of become separated from other gaming elements today, I wonder if we could reestablish some of those things because, um, like for example, I wonder if we are able to. Okay, the idea of coming out of a dungeon with thousands of gold pieces. The reason for that because there was a place to spend all those thousands of gold pieces. But one of the complaints in fifth edition is, yeah, we've got a lot of gold, but nothing to spend it on. And so armor degradation, weapons breaking. There were saving throws. Hey, you got hit with a fireball from an enemy. You saved for your equipment. You fell down in a pit. You saved for your equipment. And now, mind you, over time, people stopped using some of those rules or didn't use those rules, but it was a real thing. Bruce goes on to say, when building your dungeon, a D6 was used to help you build it. A one was a monster, a two was a trap, a three was treasure, 4 through 6 was empty. So all the dungeons you bought were half empty. Yeah. Uh, Rapin Althuk has over 20 bandit encounters when you leave the dungeon. Yeah, that well, having your henchmen and hirelings steal things from you was a thing. Like you said, you could roll. Some of the adventures were made where you would roll to find out how many things were in a room. Like you said, was it empty? Were all the goblinoids in the room or not? I mean, that was a real dungeon delving thing, and a lot of maybe something removed out of the game, but there was this idea that the dungeon master had to handle random elements thrown into their dungeon, if that makes sense, right? Like you had the overall theme of your dungeon, but as the players went through rooms, even you yourself as a dungeon master may not know what was inside that room until the player characters. It was oh not Pavlov's dog. It was a Schrodinger's cat room where you didn't know what was inside of it until the player characters opened the door, and then you rolled the dice to figure out what was inside. So, Bruce says, Raypon Athok is from Frog God Games. I didn't know that. I didn't recognize the name, but Frog God makes a lot of stuff too. Rickard says, better yet, talking about the doors. Better yet, locked and trapped door that can't be opened, and it's just a prop door that's part of the wall. Yeah, yeah. Oh, don't forget the trick doors with the exploding glyphs on the doorknobs, and then you find out that there's an empty room behind it. There was a lot of that too. There was a lot of gotchas. Drew Murray. Hey, says, "Ha, can't stay. Got kids all over right now. Just need to pop in and say, you're awesome. Keep doing what you're doing, and I point people to your stuff regularly. What? Thanks, Drew. First of all, I really appreciate that. Life is important. Get back to your family, but thanks for popping in, man. And listen, I'm here Monday through Friday. It's the same time, same place. So, and by the way, it's YouTube, Twitch, and our Discord server. So if you prefer using another format as well, you can pop in there too. So thanks a lot, man. Yeah, this came up. This entire discussion came about from a guy, Lloyd Collins, who wrote Iscloth, his own role-playing setting. It's basically based on Vikings, and it is a fictional world based around Viking culture and such. And he's very active in the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group, and he posted like, is dungeon crawling like dead? Like, do we even need it anymore? I mean, do we even dungeon crawl at all? So I thought we would bring it up, and I thought today we would talk about some of the like little bits and pieces, like the mechanical parts that we remember from our past, and why it is some things still exist and some things don't. Um, Bruce goes on to say Grimtooth has an ultimate traps compendium, which is still system neutral. Yeah, traps. Oh my goodness. Um, you know, I think today the idea of a lair, creatures, monsters with lairs, dragons in their lair, fiends in their lairs, vampires and mummy lords with their lairs, beholders in their lair. I think today it's taken the place of the big bad surrounded by the trapped rooms, because in a way, before the player characters got to fight the big bad in like first and second edition and a little bit of third, was basically you would be traps were a way to, I hate to use this word tax, but um it was a way to drain the player character's resources before you got to the big bad. And as the player, you had to measure out your resources. So like in gaming today, most players are used to doing the 15-minute adventuring day, right? I'm going to blast all my most powerful spells. I'm going to burn up all my rage. I'm going to use all my second winds and all that kind of stuff, all against the bad guy. Stop, take an 8-hour rest, get back to work, right? There was none of that. If you had 8 spells as a wizard, you you were reluctant to cast your fireball at goblins because you knew there were an army of bugbears maybe 3 rooms ahead, right? You were reluctant to cast a lightning bolt at the 1 or 2 trolls because you knew there would be 3 ghosts and 2 zombies and a zombie lord, 5 rooms ahead. And so you were reluctant to cast those spells. There was no substituting one spell for another, or hey, I get this back after a long rest. It was pretty terrible. It was pretty brutal. And so a lot of grognardians like myself would pick with some of the new players, like, you guys didn't have it the way we adventured uphill both ways. French toast. So I mean, there was a lot of that stuff. It was, and so today, when with probably more than half the character classes being able to heal, even without healing, being able to get back a minimum of like an average of half your hit points at a short rest in an hour. Like, really? And not counting encumbrance, not counting weapon and equipment degradation, without having to count your rations and things of that nature, has really turned Dungeons and Dragons more into a cinematic movie and television event rather than man versus wild. Right? It's very much, we're going to hand wave getting lost in the woods. We're going to hand wave camping out at night. We're going to hand wave eating and needing to hunt for your food. We're going to hand wave away discovering suffering conditions that permanently affect your character. Um, Now, Bruce goes on to say the Magus in Pathfinder is totally a product of the new game design. While it's not the most irritating class in the game for me, it totally embodies the spirit that games shouldn't require multiple efforts to beat a dungeon. I think it's a great. I think it's great to stat up a Magus bad guy and roll the party with their most favorite class. Yeah, hell, the Magus, the Warlock came about through the new gaming style. As a matter of fact, a lot of the a lot of the capabilities of characters came about this way. For example, the Rogue, as an example, is more of a sneak attacker than a trap disarmer. The Ranger is more of a monster hunter than a survivalist. But at the time, it, there were rules like, hey, you wanted to get to the dungeon, it took you 3 weeks, you better survive. You better not get lost. You're going to need to survive to you know, get to where you need to go because of the wandering monsters, rather than, oh, I've got a background that means I never get lost and I can instantly find food. And so I wonder if when we talk about dungeon delving, like, are we really incorporating what dungeon delving used to be, or are we telling more of a different story, right? For good or bad, is this more of action, like I said, cinematic? Is this more about having the action packed events that are happening in the world, or is this more about the psychological and a more um, intellectual aspect of trying to decipher the clues and disarm the traps and things? And I want to say that I don't know. I don't really feel like there's classic. I mean, by using the rules today, it's more of a it's more music and entertainment than it is um, sitting down and deciphering a thesis, if that makes sense. It's more noise and bright lights, I feel, rather than hell. Every character class now has magic. Every character class now has the ability to take that magic and then use it for other things. Of course, there's all kinds of the bard, the cleric, hell, the druid even is more of a buff styled character class that basically makes everyone else superhuman around them. So I don't know if it really fits into classic dungeon crawl anymore. Bruce says, I still prefer seeing the classic the classic four classes at the table than the blended classes. Exactly. Like, no longer, although it still exists today, no longer do we need the cleric to go into the dungeon any longer, right? No longer do we need the rogue any longer. Um, Heck, with one character with a criminal background already has the idea of thieves tools. So now if you're a wizard, the wizard can have the thieves tools. There are a lot of blended classes, bards, for example, monks, um, lots of reach third level, second or third level and beyond. You gain a lot of capabilities. Arcane Knight is a perfect example where so many blended classes fill a role. And with the 15-minute adventuring day, you no longer need to have the wizard hold on to their particular spells because there's other three members in the group that need to do a thing. And so I balk at the idea of when someone says, well, we need a cleric to go on this adventure. No, you don't. You honestly, you don't need a cleric at all. Considering that within an hour you can recover pretty much half, if not more, of your hit points. Um, Classically speaking. Now, of course, I say this because in fifth edition, if you read the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a lot of optional rules. At the time, they reflavored them and they were calling them modules, where you could mix and match the modules for your own game. So, mind you, you can have house rules, or use the Dungeon Master's Guide to say, you know what, we're gonna change how healing works. We're gonna change how travel works. Hey, in our table, there is no such thing as create food and water, or there is no such thing as Leomund's tiny hut. Like, you could get rid of those things, which is fine. I play in the game. I don't care. Yeah. Oh man. Bruce says, you must be running fifth editions as I still run 3.x. Yeah, I do. I'll admit I had some bad interactions with 3.x, and a bit of Pathfinder. I, I'm not going to blame anybody that still plays it, and I have no problem with anyone playing it. There are no edition police going out there stealing your game back from you, which I think is a weirdism amongst the gaming community. When a new edition comes out, people get pissed off, and I'm like, no one's knocking on your door and confiscating your old games. You can still do it. Oh, yeah. Omen says, "What is your opinion of Pathfinder Second Edition?" Oh, there's I I love I love the three action structure. I think that is brilliant, and I love the 10 plus critical, the 10 plus 10 minus crit fumble rule. I love that. Is it better than first? Don't pin me down on that. Don't do it. I can't do that. You. I love things too much. Don't make me do that. I love tabletop games too much. Don't make me pick one of my children. Oh man. Yep. Deadman says, need healing in a hurry. Get a healing potion. Well, dude, remember back in my day, the healing potion was the epitome of what you needed to go into the dungeon. Hell, you would find random healing potions in modules because they knew you would need them to continue further into the adventure, which used to bug me a little bit as a designer because I'm like, why wouldn't the bad guys open up the chest to drink the potions? Yeah. Rickard says, I want a new system. 5e is now getting a bit bloated, sadly. Yeah, gaming bloat is a problem because it's just there's always the decision: do you give people what they want or do you give people what they need? And needs always hurt. I don't have kids, but parents out there definitely know what it means to give your kids what they want versus what they need, and sometimes they need they need some tough loving, but you don't always want to give them, I don't know, ice cream and cake for breakfast, right? Tesla says new edition means they're not going to support the old edition anymore. True. Well, not necessarily. But more often than not, you are correct that they do not support the first edition any longer. But like, for example, how much more support do you need when you've got like a bookshelf about to fall in on itself, right? Like if you're a Pathfinder first edition, do you really need any new, like, do you really need support? Uh Not really. No, I'm not. I don't have any kids. Sorry, Omen. I didn't mean to trick you there. Sorry about that, dude. Bruce goes on to say, Watsy sends SWAT teams out to remove the shelves of old hardcovers throughout the world. Yeah. Now buy the new stuff. Pay pigs. Get down, get the F down, put the dice, drop it. Could you imagine? SWAT outfits over top of like robes. And like instead of like the word police or SWAT, it just says WotC and like in like the reflecto colors and stuff. Yeah, Bruce goes to say most of the game I run is still out of the core rulebook for Pathfinder First Edition. The game is in its third year. The PC's average 15th level. Wow, wow. Yeah, the Watch. Yeah, the movie like the Watch. but anyway, I'm sorry. Squirrel. Get a little distracted. I think some of the other um, elements of dungeon delving, something that Rickard brought up before, is like when it comes to dungeon crawling, there's not too much social interaction, right? Not too much of that. But because there's such little social interaction, it's pretty much combat the entire time. I mean, sure, there are skill challenges. Like today, we call them skill challenges, but back in the day, you 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 either had conversations with your game master, or it was necessary for you to use a lot of skills because there were so many things in a dungeon you had to get around. You had to hide and sneak and lift and jump and climb and heck, there were traps and rooms that you had to intellectually figure your way out of. Like, hey, you go into a room and there are three doors, or there's three levers, or there's a rope in the middle of the door of the room that goes up into a hole, but there's also two statues, and there was a lot of like pull the lever first, open the door again, and things like that. Um, there was a lot of that going on that I think sometimes we flow past. It washes over us like water today when it comes to skill challenges. We don't, despite the fact we're rolling a d20 plus and minus some modifiers, we don't measure combat in this. I mean, we don't measure skills balanced with the same importance as combat, but a lot of modules were very important. Like there were a lot of modules where you wouldn't get through a section of the dungeon without the entire party um, going across the classic rope bridge. I still remember a module, and I don't remember the title of it. To get across, I think it was like lava or flaming floor. There were platforms, round platforms, and in the middle of each platform, there was a rope hanging from the ceiling. So if you put weight on one side of the platform, it would tilt and drop you into the flame below. You would just die. So you had to figure out if you would need two PCs to get on one platform to balance out each platform and figure out a way to get another PC onto your platform by having another PC leave at the same time. It was kind of not complicated, but it was like it came out of one of those thought experiment puzzles. So there was a ton of puzzles and riddles in dungeon delving that we don't see at all today. Um, Bruce goes on to say that campaign is the Slumbering Czar saga. They are in their third page of obituaries. what what a way to describe that. A lot of Frog God Games products have obituaries to be filled in at the back of the book. That is, I had never obituaries. No, you know what? No one ever really like has a funeral for their characters. Remember back in the day, PCs would just like carry their dead comrades on their shoulders so they could take them back to the resurrection stores back in the village. That was a little bit third page of obituaries. I love that. Saying goodbye to your characters and taking their boots off and putting them on the brand new character that comes along on the adventure. Yeah, I miss those days. I miss those. Now, here's something else that has changed quite a bit. Um, Players creating characters with long, involved backstories that they're truly invested in. There was a period of time where It wasn't until about fifth level, maybe sixth level, that you really got invested in your character because, or there was a hell of a lot of table flipping as well, where didn't matter what level your character was, your character could literally die the next game. Um, Heck, as a matter of fact, most of the sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth levels spells were like insta death spells. A power word kill comes to mind. Disintegration comes to mind. Heck, even if you fought creatures, creatures had petrification, poisons, a ton of abilities, and it was when we say save or die, it wasn't some of it wasn't literally saving your character or your character failed to save and died. It was fail to save and your character is no longer your character, right? If your character was killed by a wraith, too bad. If your character was attacked by an energy drain creature, you lost 5 levels. If your character was you looked at a mummy, not mummy, Medusa or a basilisks, or got blasted by fog of a Gorgon. Sorry, character turned to stone. Better hope you have stone to flesh spell. Otherwise, sorry, failed your save. Too bad. There was a ton of that back in the day. So, us old grognards, you came equipped with multiple characters, or you were just expecting it, right? As a matter of fact, there were plenty of modules that had built into it, say, a cage that had innocent people in it, which was suggested in the box text. Oh, by the way, if three or more PCs die, use some of the escaped people to add to bolster the adventuring group. So one of the player characters would go, all right, I'm gonna make another character while everyone adventured further down into the dungeon to find a cage that some of the big bads had people trapped in it to bolster your group again, which is why you always had to hire henchmen and mercenaries and yeomen and those kind of people to go down into the dungeon, simply because you adventured with 8 or 9 people. Rickard says, yeah, dungeon crawling in the heyday was also in the days of disposable characters. It was, as a matter of fact, what is it, DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classics. You start out in what they call the funnel. You make up a half a dozen characters and you run them through a funnel, and whoever survives becomes first level. Yeah. Omen says, I remember a character who sacrificed himself to save his friends from demons. The demons in question were succubi, and all his comrades wept. It should have been me there. Yeah, yeah. Saying goodbye to the characters. Bruce goes on to say, quote, how many brothers and sisters does your new player have? 6, the most for the halfling. Yeah, that's awesome. I only have 2 siblings. The most for my elf. Yeah, always have to have the siblings. I'm not playing Ragnar. I'm playing Thagnar today. Bruce continues and says, you better roll up your siblings' stats. Yeah. Poor Mrs. Thimbledown. She's lost so many children to meet Grinder Rock. Yeah. You know what? Even in old modules, you would come across other adventurers, dead bodies, of course. You'd come across adventurers in the modules because they died in there. Yep. Yeah. Deadman says the questing beast videos are roughly 5 hours and 45 minutes long for all 3 of them. Yeah, like I said before, questing beast is literally reading the entire Dungeon Master's Guide, and there's stuff in it I remember, air quotes, reading the Dungeon Master's Guide, but you know how it is. You pick up none of us really reads a gaming manual from beginning to end. They're not novels, right? You don't read them from beginning to end because it's not a flowing story. You read them because you need to get to what you need to get to. And while I remember some of that, I had forgotten a ton of it. I was like, oh, that's right. Yeah. Uh, I'm going to call you Dream On. Dream On Voyager says dungeon crawling was an overall festivity, that we all planned and tried to take cautions wherever we can think these days. Mindset has changed immensely nowadays. Thank you very much for joining us over there on Twitch there, Dream Voyager. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're talking this entire week about the dungeon crawl. It's I'm being a little sarcastic, like, is the dungeon crawl dead? Is it not? Um, Today, I just thought we'd talk about some of the differences between the old days and today and stuff like that. Yeah. There's Tesla said something. How much can you read in 2 minutes per video? Yeah, those are long videos. Reading entire Dungeon Master's Guide. That's crazy. But yeah, like you're saying there, Dream Voyager. The We used to plan on dungeon delving. That's why I said we used to go with the 10-foot pole and the chickens and the ball bearings and the sack of powder. I mean, we would hire 7 henchmen and 3 underlings or something to carry our equipment. We You would plan to find a place into the dungeon. We would literally, like the game master would even say, guys, you know what, where you're at, it's not a safe place. And we would try to find a literal place in the dungeon to camp out. And you didn't leave the dungeon. You didn't go back. You didn't take 8-hour rests in the dungeon. You were lucky to get an hour's rest or something, because of the wandering monster idea. It was pretty difficult to advance. Like Bruce was talking about his group, with the Slumbing Czar saga, 15th level. You only get there when you have 3 pages of obituaries, right? There was never this idea of telling a story through the lifespan of a PC, because most of the PCs were pretty disposable. Today, this is a weirdism, and maybe I'll bring it up later on this week, about the idea of, okay, you make a first level character gets killed at 8th level, right? Player character gets pissed off, but why? Didn't you know that Dungeons and Dragons should be lethal? Because maybe we've incorporated so many stop gaps that now we are at a point where character death is so rare that when a player character does die, maybe it almost feels like it shouldn't have happened that way, right? I don't know. I'm Maybe it's more psychological. I'm wondering. And again, thank you, Dead Man. By the way, we've come to the end of our show. Please remember that this show is live Monday through Friday. It is the only daily live broadcast, unscripted, podcasty, vlogcast, I don't know what you call, long-form content show on the internet, hosted by me, myself. And of course, I'm a bit of an idiot, so I'm surrounded by the brilliance of many of you out there. And I really appreciate all of you taking part in these live chats. Please pop in anytime. I read all comments, even those placed in after the show is done. And again, we're talking about dungeon delving the entire week. Tomorrow is World Building Wednesday. We do have Third Pillar Thursday, Third Pillar of Exploration. That's kind of my baby here for Critical Hit Publishing. And we do have Future Friday, where we talk about transhumanist tabletop RPG games, science fiction, a pretty niche thing, but I think dungeon delving can even fit in there as well. But anyway, guys, I really appreciate all of you taking part. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Dream Voyager and Drew. Everybody have a great one. I'll see you later. Bye. And here's my awkwardness as we get out of here. See ya.